The PlayStation era was a remarkable time for gaming, with the release of many original and innovative titles, as well as a large amount of budget titles existing only to pad the console's catalog. Among all of the budgeted titles, however, was a hidden gem, a little game called Martian Gothic Unification. And we here at GameSomniac are asking the question, whatever happened to Martian Gothic? As always, if you enjoy our videos and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to the channel where we upload all of our latest content first, and if you want to be the first to see our latest content, then go ahead and click that bell to be notified whenever we upload something new. Martian Gothic Unification is a survival horror video game that was developed for the PC by Creative Reality and published by TalonSoft. The game was released in May of 2000 and saw mixed reviews among critics. In 2001, the game was then ported to the Sony PlayStation under the development of Coyote Developments and published by Take-Two Interactive. While the port would also face mixed reviews, much like its PC counterpart, the PlayStation version seemed to score much better than the PC version, albeit having received less reviews from more acclaimed critics. The game itself is a single-player survival horror experience that tells the game's story from a third-person perspective. Like many games in the era before it, Martian Gothic Unification utilized tank controls, fixed camera angles, and also featured a very unique game mechanic called vac tubes. A system that, although was unique in its own way, was largely reminiscent to the item box found in Capcom's Resident Evil, which had come out 4 years prior to Martian Gothic. Fans would often compare the two games, describing Martian Gothic as nothing more than Resident Evil in space with a little touch of Event Horizon. Though unlike Resident Evil, which provided the player with a large variety of weapons to adequately defend themselves against the game's equally large variety of enemies, Martian Gothic Unification was more focused on puzzle solving and the exploration of the area around you rather than the combat. The combat system of Martian Gothic focuses on crowd control or dispatching small and weak enemies, as it's easy to become overwhelmed by the non-dead who walk at exactly the same pace as the player. The game is centered around 3 playable characters that are separated from one another, a gimmick very similar to Manic Mansion 2: Day of the Tentacle, released in 1993. Now, one of the more interesting challenges that the game has to offer is that if the characters ever meet face to face during a single playthrough, it will result in a game over. Now, to help avoid this from happening, the player can easily and quickly switch to any character at any moment, as well as keep in contact with the other characters using a radio for easy communication. Because the characters cannot meet up and trade items, they can trade items using the aforementioned vac tubes that are scattered throughout the base. The vac tubes can carry up to 4 items to another hatch connected to the vac tubes anywhere in the base. If the player needs to leave behind items, the vac tube can hold up to 6 items. Now, as I said before, these vac tubes are scattered all throughout the base, and if the player is unsure where they left a single item, it can be checked using an in-game computer to bring up the list of contents of any hatch, including ones that have not been accessed yet. Another unique feature of the game is that the non-dead enemies cannot be killed permanently. Shooting an enemy enough times will incapacitate it temporarily, but it will reanimate if the player re-enters that area later and comes too close to the enemy's fallen model. Now, saving is done through an in-game computer game called Martian Mayhem, and it's limited to 2 to 4 saves in the PC version and 12 saves in the PlayStation version. Now, for all you hardcore players out there, if you can hold out, once the player reaches the Necropolis excavation site, a laptop can be found that allows the player to save anywhere. The game takes place on the 17th of June in 2019, 10 months after Vita 1's last broadcast to Earth with the message, "Stay alone, stay alive." The investigation team of Kenzo Uji, Martin Karne, and Diane Matlock approach Vita 1 on Mars in their spacecraft. Vita 1's main computer, MOOD, or Mood, appears to have noticed their arrival. Kenzo is forced to make a crash landing on the Martian surface, and its crew depart into different airlocks of the Vita 1. Mood apathetically predicts that, although these 3 have entered, only 2 will leave alive. The trio is separated and obtains radios from their spacesuits to stay in verbal contact. All 3 go through decontamination, but each notes that there was something wrong with the decontamination. Initially, only Kenzo can enter the base, as Karne and Matlock's airlock doors are sealed. From there, the player takes control of all 3 characters, starting with Kenzo, who then explore different areas of the Vita 1. The information collected by the trio, in the end, reveals the truth about Vita 1's last broadcast and the events that took place before the base went dark. Ultimately, what killed Martian Gothic was the type of game it was versus the time in which the game was released. It was a 3D game, like that of Silent Hill and Resident Evil, although it followed Resident Evil a lot closer in comparison when you take into account game features and the pre-rendered backgrounds. It was also released in 2000, which was a time when Half-Life had redefined the first-person shooter genre. The PlayStation 2 had just launched in March, a mere 2 months prior to the game's initial PC release, and despite the PS2 existing, the game was ported to a console that people had just upgraded from. The attention wasn't there, but had the game seen a release back in 1996, or even 1998 at the latest, it may have done better. Expectations for games at that time would have been on par with what Martian Gothic was projecting, but when you look at the game and the time that it was released, really it's just a game that in terms of effort was too little too late. I've often wondered why there hasn't been a studio willing to pick up the IP and revitalize it with a remaster or a remake, but when you think about it, I guess Dead Space pretty much filled that role, becoming a much better version of Martian Gothic. I don't mean to say that Dead Space is an unoriginal idea or that it's a ripoff of Martian Gothic, that's not what I'm saying at all. But if you take the idea of the Triomorph, and the lone engineers stuck in this space station full of death and destruction, you essentially have Dead Space. Although a remake, done in the same way as Capcom did for Resident Evil 2, could still make for an entertaining game. There really aren't any good space-themed survival horror games for the modern consoles right now, with the exception of maybe Alien Isolation or Bethesda's Prey remake, which I can't in good faith or out of common decency ever suggest or recommend anybody to play. Now, at the time of writing the script, which was 2 years ago, the last installment in the Dead Space series was released for the PS3 back in 2013, and after that time, the series was completely dead. So if the IP had been picked up and remade, Martian Gothic wouldn't have had any direct competition. Now, as we all know now, Dead Space is one of the many games getting the remake-reboot treatment, but with this trend of remaking and rebooting classic video game series now becoming more commonplace, the one thing we're not seeing is developers using this treatment to ultimately fix bad games, or games that weren't even necessarily bad, they just weren't great either for one reason or another. Even with the revival of the Dead Space series, a remake or even a reboot of Martian Gothic could actually be a surprising breath of fresh air if the developing studio really took the time to flesh things out. Go ahead and add in some new difficulties, provide the players with some new challenges, hell, up the replay value with one of those fancy new random modes all the kids are talking about. You know, the ones that alter the experience of every playthrough by fucking switching shit and putting it in random places. Now with that said, I wouldn't go and change a lot either. Obviously change out the tank controls, but really the game just needs a graphic overhaul, maybe some updated puzzles, monsters, and you could even still keep the separated characters gimmick. Also, you could develop the game in a way that allows you to choose your camera style. People like options, and to me, I see the survival horror genre really thriving in third person over the shoulder or fixed camera angles. Now I know a lot of people nowadays are over the fixed camera angles, but I have to disagree. It's still a fascinating feature, and it's a great tension building tool, which is what you'd want in a horror game. Now that's it for this video. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I want to know, what do you guys think about Martian Gothic Unification? What are some other games you want to see us talk about? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and for more gaming news and entertainment, keep it locked right here at GameSomniac. Bye-bye!